The very first episode of South Park aired in August 1997. Before the second season even began, the show had already contradicted itself. A mother had two names, a father had no name. A child who would die over 100 times had no explanation for how he kept coming back. And a character whose face was drawn a certain way had no identity at all beyond that face. 26 seasons later, none of those contradictions were ever fully cleaned up. Some of them got new explanations that created new problems. Some of them got retconned in ways that made old episodes mean something completely different. One of them involves a real person whose departure from the show may never be fully understood. This is every South Park timeline mistake and unsolved mystery, laid out in full, in order, with nothing left out. Welcome to East Park. Let's begin. Cartman's father. The triple retcon South Park spent 13 years lying about who fathered Eric Cartman. Not by accident, not through carelessness. 3 separate times, across 3 different seasons, the show gave a different answer to the same question, and the third answer made the first 2 look like amateur hour compared to what it actually revealed. To understand how deep this goes, start at the beginning. Season 1 ends on a cliffhanger. The episode is called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, and by the end of it, the entire town of South Park has been dragged into a DNA investigation, trying to figure out who slept with Leon Cartman 9 years ago. The list of possible fathers is enormous. It includes almost every adult male in town, plus the entire roster of the 1989 Denver Broncos. Dr. Mephisto, the strange scientist who lives outside of town, is about to announce the result. Then he gets shot. The screen cuts to black. A text card appears promising the answer in the season 2 premiere. Fans waited. The show had built genuine momentum around this mystery. People actually wanted to know. Season 2 premieres on April 1st, 1998. The episode that airs is called Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Annis. It has nothing to do with Cartman, nothing to do with his father, nothing to do with anything the season 1 finale set up. It is 22 minutes of Terrence and Phillip, the Canadian comedy duo the boys love, fighting a villain named Saddam Hussein. That is the entire episode. No resolution, no Cartman, no answer. Parker and Stone later admitted this was an April Fool's joke on their own audience. They thought, in their words, that no one was actually going to care who a cartoon character's dad was. Fan reaction proved them completely wrong. The backlash was bad enough that the episode originally scheduled for later in the season, the actual resolution, was moved up 3 weeks to calm people down. April 22nd, 1998, Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut finally airs. Dr. Mephisto recovered. The potential fathers gather. The DNA results come in. The answer, Leon Cartman is the father. She is a hermaphrodite, a person born with both male and female biology. She fathered a child with another woman. That child is Eric. And because of this, a new question immediately opens up. Who is Cartman's mother? The narrator of the episode keeps asking. Cartman himself starts to pursue it, then stops, throws his hands up, says, "Oh, forget it," and the episode ends. This answer was not popular. Fans found it unsatisfying. It was absurd in a way that felt like the writers avoiding the question rather than answering it. For 12 seasons, it sat on the record as the official version of events. Then season 14 happened. The episodes are called 200 and 201. They air in 2010, celebrating the show's 200th episode. Every celebrity and public figure the show has ever mocked shows up to sue South Park for defamation. Somewhere inside this enormous plot, an older and more deranged Scott Tenorman reappears. He has a secret. He spent years in a mental institution obsessing over Cartman, researching his history, and he found something. The town, it turns out, lied. Leon Cartman was never a hermaphrodite. That story was made up. The real answer had been buried for years because the Denver Broncos were having a good season, and the people of South Park did not want anything disrupting that. The actual father is a man named Jack Tenorman, a former right tackle for the Denver Broncos who had an affair with Liane at a town barn dance. The town covered it up. They let the hermaphrodite story stand. They watched Cartman grow up without a father and said nothing. Jack Tenorman's last name will be familiar to anyone who watched season 5. In season 5, episode 4, Scott Tenorman Must Die. Cartman goes to war with a 9th grader named Scott Tenorman. Scott tricks Cartman into buying his pubic hair for $10. Cartman keeps trying to get revenge and keeps failing, so he builds something elaborate and patient and completely without mercy. He tells a local farmer that Scott's parents, Jack and Mary Tenorman, are dangerous pony killers who should be shot on sight. The farmer shoots them both. Cartman collects their body. He grinds them into chili. He serves that chili to Scott Tenorman at a carnival and watches his face while Scott figures out what he just ate. Scott Tenorman's parent, both of them, ground into chili and fed to their own son. When the 201 reveal lands, the full weight of what happened in Scott Tenorman Must Die changes completely. Jack Tenorman was not just some 9th grader's father. He was Cartman's biological father too. Cartman had his own father shot, turned into food, and fed to his half-brother 9 years before he ever found out any of this was true. The show never told him. The town never told him. Scott Scott Tenorman had figured it out during his time in the mental institution, and his entire plan in 200 and 201 was to force this information into the open, to make Cartman understand what he had actually done. That Cartman has always wanted a father, that the one person who might have played that role was already dead by Cartman's own hand, that the chili in season 5 was not just the most vengeful thing Cartman ever did, it was, without him knowing it, one of the worst things he ever did to himself. The timing question around Scott Tenorman must die, and the 201 reveal is one that the South Park fan community has never fully resolved. The episode Scott Tenorman Must Die aired in 2001. The reveal in 201 aired into 2010. That is a 9-year gap between the episode that established Jack Tenorman as a character and the episode that declared Jack Tenorman to be Cartman's father. Parker and Stone have never given a direct answer about whether the connection was planned from the beginning or discovered later, when the show needed a way to answer the father question at the 200th episode milestone. Both possibilities exist and both have evidence pointing toward them. The case for it being planned rests on the specificity of the detail. Jack Tenorman is not a generic background character in Scott Tenorman Must Die. He has a name. He has a profession. He is a former Denver Broncos player, and the Denver Broncos connection to Cartman's father was established as far back as the season 1 finale, where the list of potential fathers included the entire 1989 Broncos roster. If the writers in 2001 were already thinking about how the father mystery would eventually resolve, planting a former Broncos player as Scott's father in Scott Tenorman Must Die would be exactly the kind of long-range setup that a deliberate plan would produce. The case for it being discovered later rests on something simpler. South Park does not typically plan 9 years ahead. The show operates on a week-by-week production schedule that is almost entirely reactive. Decisions about what an episode will be about are frequently made days before it airs. A 9-year plan would be unlike almost everything else the show has ever done. Parker and Stone have said nothing definitive about which version is true. The connection exists. The gap between the two episodes exists. Everything in between is a question the show created and has never chosen to answer. Think about the math of this for a moment. Scott Tenorman Must Die aired in 2001. 201 aired in 2010. The writers either planned this connection 9 years in advance, or they found a way to reach backward into the show's own history and make something old mean something new and darker. Parker and Stone have never fully confirmed which it was. What is confirmed across the show's own wiki and documented production history is that the hermaphrodite answer from season 2 was retconned, officially and completely. The show's 200th episode special had a character stand up and announce that the town made the whole thing up. 12 years of the hermaphrodite answer gone, replaced by something that made one of the show's most beloved episodes, Scott Tenorman Must Die, which fans have consistently ranked among the greatest South Park episodes ever made, into a tragedy that Cartman will never fully recover from, because the one thing he is missing is the one thing he already destroyed. There is also the question of what happened to Cartman's actual mother, the woman Leanne, allegedly impregnated under the hermaphrodite story. That thread was never resolved because the hermaphrodite story was fiction. It was dropped in real time at the end of the episode when Cartman said, "Oh, forget it," and then it was dropped permanently when season 14 declared the whole thing a lie. Whoever the mystery mother figure was in the original story no longer exists in the canon of the show. What remains is this: 3 answers across 13 years to a single question. The first answer was a cliffhanger left unresolved for months because the show misjudged its own audience. The second answer was a joke that nobody found funny. The third answer retroactively made the second answer a lie told by the entire town and turned the first answer's Denver Broncos connection into the key that unlocked one of the most disturbing revelations the show has ever produced. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The identity of Cartman's father is resolved now. The fallout from how that identity was revealed and what Cartman did before he knew will never fully be. And yet this is only the beginning, because Eric Cartman is not the only person in South Park whose entire existence rests on a foundation that keeps shifting underneath him. There is another character who has died over 100 times, come back every single time, and received 3 separate explanations for how that is possible, each one contradicting the last. Section 2. The Kenny Problem 127 deaths. 3 contradictory explanations, and 1 season of pretending he never existed to Kenny McCormick has died 127 times. 98 of those deaths are in the main series. 12 happened in the original shorts, 14 in the video games, twice in the movie, twice in the special. He has been crushed by a satellite dish, eaten by rats, struck by lightning, impaled, drowned, blown up, run over by a train, and killed by a malfunctioning toilet. He has been killed by death itself. He has been killed by the boys. boys. He has been killed by things that should not logically be able to kill anyone, and some of those things are too absurd to explain without watching them. Every single time he comes back, and for 26 seasons, the show has never once managed to agree with itself on how. The first explanation is no explanation at all. Seasons 1 through 5 treat Kenny's deaths as a running joke with no internal logic attached. He dies. His friends mourn him for roughly one sentence. Stan says, "Oh my god, they killed Kenny." Kyle says, "You bastard." And then the episode ends, and the next episode begins, and Kenny is simply standing there again. Nobody asks where he went. Nobody asks how he returned. Nobody acknowledges that the kid standing next to them in class was a pile of ash or a smear on a highway 22 minutes ago. This was intentional. Parker and Stone designed the gag to function as a reset button. Kenny dies. The show resets. The joke refreshes for next week. They stated in interviews that the reason Kenny died so often was connected to him being poor, though they never fully unpacked what that meant in any mechanical sense. The deaths were not meant to be explained. They were meant to be funny through repetition and through the specific cruelty of watching the same kid get destroyed over and over while everyone around him moves on immediately. The phrase itself became one of the most recognized lines the show ever produced. "Oh my god, they killed Kenny" became something people said in everyday conversation without necessarily being able to name the episode it came from or explain why it was funny. The structure of the joke, the death, the reaction, the "you bastards" from Kyle, the immediate reset was absorbed into popular culture so completely that it stopped needing context. People who had never watched a full episode of South Park knew the line. That kind of cultural reach is rare, and it came entirely from repetition. The joke worked because it kept happening, and it kept happening because the show never once slowed down to examine whether it made sense. Parker and Stone explained in DVD commentary for the early seasons that the "you bastards" line was not actually directed at whoever or whatever killed Kenny in any given episode. The line, they said, was directed at themselves, at the writers, for putting the death into the script. This is a small detail, but it changes the texture of the joke slightly. Kyle is not really blaming the villain, or the accident, or the circumstances. He is registering an objection to the narrative decision itself. The show is aware it keeps killing this child. Kyle, on some level the show never makes fully explicit, is aware of it too. There is also a specific episode, season 4, episode 4, called Cartman's Silly Hat Crime 2000, where Stan and Kyle are the ones who accidentally kill Kenny. The phrasing shifts. Stan cries out, "Oh my god, we killed Kenny," in a tone that the show describes as somewhat nonchalant. The acknowledgement that the formula can flip, that the boys themselves can be the cause rather than the witnesses, was one of the small variations the show introduced to keep the gag from becoming completely mechanical. When the boys kill Kenny, Stan says "we" instead of "they," and the guilt lands differently than the outrage of "you bastard." The show noticed that distinction and played it. That worked for a while. Then the show tried to give it an answer. Season 4, episode 14. The episode is called Cartman Joins Nambla. Kenny gets killed, and the episode briefly attempts to explain the cycle for the first time. The explanation offered is that when Kenny dies, his soul travels back to his mother. She becomes pregnant with him again. He is reborn. He grows back to his original age almost instantly, retaining his memories and his face and his orange parka. The mechanics of this are never examined closely. How fast is almost instantly? Hours? Days? The show does not say. The episode moves on. This explanation creates problems the moment you start thinking about it. If Kenny is being reborn each time, there are episodes where he dies more than once within the same story. In season 1, there are moments where he dies, and the show needs him back before the next scene, not the next episode. The rebirth explanation cannot account for that kind of turnaround. A pregnancy, even a magically fast one, takes more than a commercial break. There is also the train problem. In the 2-part episode, Cartman's mom is a dirty slut, and Cartman's mom is still a dirty slut. The season 1 finale and season 2 premiere, Kenny is run over by a train in part 1. He simply reappears at the start of part 2 with zero explanation and zero acknowledgement from any character. The rebirth theory introduced in season 4 cannot explain a same episode resurrection that happened 3 seasons before the theory existed. So the first attempt at an explanation was applied backward onto events it could not cover. Then there is the Parka theory. Season 4, episode 1 is called Cripple Fight. In this episode, Timmy gives Jimmy a parka that is nearly identical to Kenny's orange one. What follows is a sequence in which a series of fatal accidents and dangerous situations keep occurring around Jimmy, but they all miss him. A voice can even be faintly heard in the background saying "there's Kenny," as if the universe is trying to target Kenny specifically and is confused by the matching parka. The episode uses this to suggest that something about the parka itself is connected to Kenny's continuous misfortune, that the orange jacket is in some way a magnet for the specific kind of disaster that keeps finding him. This is not a firm explanation. The show presents it as a joke rather than a rule, but it sits in the canon as one more piece of the Kenny puzzle, one more attempt by the show to gesture toward a reason without fully committing to one. The Parka theory, the rebirth theory, and the later Cthulhu cult theory all exist in the same universe, pointing at the same phenomena, without any of them fully accounting for everything the others leave uncovered. Then season 5 happened. Season 5, episode 13. The episode is called Kenny Died. Up to this point, every death Kenny had suffered was treated as temporary and disposable. This one was not. Kenny contracts a rare muscular illness, a wasting disease that destroys his muscles slowly and from which there is no recovery. The episode plays it completely straight. Cartman cries. Kyle sits with Kenny in the hospital. Stan cannot bring himself to go inside because seeing Kenny like that is too much for him. Kenny dies in a hospital bed, not from something absurd and immediate, but from something slow and real feeling, and the show does not cut away. The episode is one of the most tonally distinct things South Park produced in its first 5 seasons. The show built its reputation on being fast and brutal and irreverent, on treating everything, including death, as material for a joke. Kenny Dies asks the audience to feel something about a death that the show had previously treated as a punchline hundreds of times. The request is complicated by that history. The audience has watched Kenny die over and over. The joke has been that none of it matters, and now the show is asking for the death to matter. It works largely because of Cartman. His grief in the episode is not played straight. He is using Kenny's illness for his own purposes throughout the story, trying to get stem cell research legalized so he can clone his own Shakey's pizza. But the moment at the end where his scheme falls apart and he is left standing in the knowledge that Kenny is gone and his plan came to nothing lands with a specific kind of weight. Cartman's grief is complicated by his selfishness, which makes it feel more real than uncomplicated sadness would have. Parker and Stone later said that giving Kenny a real death, a death that meant something, gave them an enormous amount of material to work with. They had gotten tired of the gag. The joke had run its course. Killing him properly felt like the right move, and then they kept him dead for an entire season. Season 6 runs for 17 episodes, and Kenny McCormick is not in a single one of them as a present living character. The show replaces him. Butters steps into the 4-person group dynamic for a stretch. Then Tweek is brought in as a replacement 4th friend. The show acknowledges the absence in a handful of small ways, but never makes it a central story. Kenny is simply gone, and the other 3 boys carry on. The Butters experiment is interesting in its own right because it revealed something about what Kenny had actually been providing. Butters is not a replacement for Kenny in any functional sense. He is a completely different kind of character, with a completely different relationship to the group, and the show discovered quickly that his presence changed the dynamic rather than filling a gap. Butters is not someone things happen to as a running joke. Butters is someone whose specific innocence and specific suffering the show uses differently. He could not be Kenny because Kenny was not really a person in the earlier season. Kenny was a function, a recurring event, a position in the group that existed to be vacated dramatically and then refilled without comment. Butters is too much of a person to occupy that position without changing what the position means. Tweek's stint as the 4th friend is even more revealing. Tweek is anxious and overwhelmed and constantly on the edge of a breakdown, which makes him funny in a specific way that is completely unlike anything Kenny's presence produced. The season 6 episode Professor Chaos, in which the boys hold auditions to find a new best friend, acknowledges the replacement process directly and treats it as a story, which is the show being more honest about what it is doing than it usually allows itself to be. The boys are picking a replacement for Kenny. The episode is about the picking. The absurdity of the process, reducing the question of friendship to an audition, is also the show quietly acknowledging that what Kenny occupied in the group was a role rather than a relationship. This was the only time in the show's history that Kenny's death actually changed anything about the structure of the series. Every other death reset and vanished. This one reshaped an entire season's worth of storytelling and forced the writers to experiment with characters they had previously kept on the margins. Then he came back. Season 6, episode 17. The episode is called Red Sleigh Down. It is a Christmas episode in which Cartman attempts to be nice enough to earn presents, Jesus dies fighting soldiers in the Middle East, and Santa Claus gets captured. At the very end of the episode, Kenny simply appears. He's standing with the other boy. He is wearing his orange parka. No one asks where he has been. No one explains how he returned from a disease that killed him a year ago. The show does not comment on it in any way whatsoever. The most deliberately meaningful death the show ever gave Kenny was resolved by having him show up at the end of a Christmas episode about Santa and Iraq, and then saying nothing about it. The nothing is the point. The show had made Kenny's death matter, had devoted an episode to it, had kept him absent for an entire season, had restructured its own main cast around the gap he left, and then brought him back the exact same way it had always brought him back before any of that happened, with without explanation, without acknowledgement. Standing there in his parka like 17 episodes of his absence were a misunderstanding that did not require comment. Fans who had followed the season 6 experiments with Butters and Tweak were left with a resurrection that the show treated as if the meaningful death had never happened. The specificity of Kenny die hospital, the slow wasting illness, the genuine grief, the weight of watching something that was supposed to be a joke become something that was not, was dissolved by a wordless appearance at the end of a Christmas special. That unresolved resurrection set up what became the third and most complete explanation for Kenny's cycle, and it came 4 seasons later. Season 14. The 3 episodes are called Coon 2, Hindsight, Mysterian Reeses, and Coon vs. Coon and Friend. This arc introduces Kenny as Mysterian, a costumed superhero whose power is that he cannot die. He wakes up in his bed after every death. He always comes back. Nobody else remembers that he died. He confronts Stan and Kyle directly about this. He demonstrates dying in front of them and watches as their memories of it immediately disappear from their faces. The forgetting is instantaneous and total. The explanation for why this happens is that his parents attended cult meetings devoted to an ancient being called Cthulhu. At those meetings, they pledged allegiance in exchange for something that was never fully named. The result of that pledge is that their son cannot stay dead. Every time he dies, his mother gives birth to him again, and he returns to his same age, his same body, with all his memories intact. The curse of immortality is passed through the parent, not chosen by Kenny himself. This is the most complete version of the answer the show has ever offered. It ties the rebirth mechanic to a specific supernatural cause. It explains why nobody remembers Kenny dying. The forgetting appears to be part of whatever arrangement his parents made. It also explains something that had gone unexplained for years. In earlier seasons, Cartman occasionally seems to have some awareness that Kenny dies repeatedly. The Mysterian arc suggests that Cartman, who was not in the room when Kenny demonstrated the forgetting to Stan and Kyle, may exist partially outside whatever memory erasing effect accompanies the deaths. The Mysterian arc also does something with Kenny that the show had rarely attempted before. It makes his experience of immortality feel genuinely terrible. He does not enjoy coming back. He does not find it useful or empowering. He is exhausted by it. He is isolated by it. The one thing that makes him different from every other person in South Park is also the one thing he cannot share with anyone, because the sharing disappears the moment it happens. Every person he tells immediately forgets. He is trapped in a loop that is not a superpower so much as a sentence, condemned to keep dying and keep returning and keep watching the people around him lose the memory of what they just witnessed. This reframe of Kenny's immortality, from a running gag about a poor kid getting killed to something genuinely isolating, is the show reaching back into 26 episodes worth of deaths and finding something more complicated than a punchline inside all of them. But this third explanation does not fix the problems created by the first 2. If the Cthulhu cult explanation is the correct one, then the season 4 rebirth theory was either wrong or was an incomplete version of the same process. The 2 accounts are close enough to overlap, Soul returning to the mother reborn rapidly, but the details differ, and more importantly, the season 4 episode presents the explanation as if it is new information. Kenny's parents do not appear to already know about a cult. The show treats the mechanics in season 4 as an internal biological quirk rather than as the consequence of a deal made with something ancient and powerful. More pressingly, neither the season 4 nor the season 14 explanation covers the same episode resurrections that happened repeatedly in seasons 1 through 3. The show's own wiki acknowledges that early season deaths are typically treated as non-canon, meaning the show itself has quietly decided that some of what happened in the first few years simply does not count. That decision creates its own problem. If early deaths are non-canon, how many of them are being discounted? The official count of 98 deaths in the main series presumably includes those early appearances. If some percentage of those are non-canon, the real number is lower, but the show has never published a list of which deaths count and which do not. There is also the season 2 clip show episode, City on the Edge of Forever, where the show directly acknowledges the impossibility of Kenny dying twice in one day. Cartman brings up a previous Kenny death in a flashback. Stan and Kyle object, pointing out that Kenny already died from the monster earlier that same day. Cartman says, "Oh yeah, I guess that does not make sense." The entire episode is later revealed to be a dream, which the show uses as a convenient exit from having to reconcile what just happened. The show acknowledged the problem, then it dissolved the problem inside a dream sequence. Then it kept killing Kenny anyway. 127 times, 3 explanations, 1 season of him being fully absent, 1 resurrection that was never addressed, a parka that may or may not be responsible for the targeting, a memory erasing mechanism that means the other characters in the show will never fully understand what they keep watching happen to their friend. The strangest part of all all of this is that Kenny himself, under the Mysterian identity, is the only character who experiences the full weight of the situation. He remembers every death. He remembers waking up in his bed afterward. He knows that Stan and Kyle will forget the moment he shows them. He has been carrying this alone for the entire run of the show, and when he finally puts it into words, the people he tells immediately lose the memory of him saying it. That is either a continuity disaster or the most quietly devastating thing the show has ever built into a character it spent years treating as a throwaway punchline. Possibly both. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What happened with Kenny is strange enough on its own, but names in South Park have their own separate history of being changed, forgotten, reassigned, and retconned, and one particular name change, affecting a character who had been on the show since the very first episode, set off a chain reaction of continuity problems that the show created entirely on purpose and then had no clean way to escape. Section 3. The Token Tolkien Catastrophe. 25 years of a name. Then a retcon that broke everything for 25 years. His name was Token Black. Every episode, every credit, every piece of merchandise, every video game, the name was spelled out on screen multiple times across the show's run. On a jacket he wore, on a record contract he signed, on a production company label that bore his name. The character himself wrote it down, Token, T-O-K-E-N. The joke was obvious, and it was always obvious. He was the token black kid, the one black child placed into a mostly white group of friends to fulfill a television diversity requirement, and the show named him after exactly that trope because South Park has never once been subtle about what it is doing when it decides to make a point. Then on February 9th, 2022, season 25, episode 2, an episode called The Big Fix, the show announced that his name had never been Token at all. His name, the episode revealed, is Tolkien, named after J. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. His parents named him after one of the most famous writers in history. Stan and Randy, who represent the audience in the episode, are informed of this directly by a character who speaks to the camera. They realize with growing embarrassment that they had been mishearing and misspelling the name for their entire friendship. The rest of the class had known the correct spelling the whole time. Cartman knew. He just did not know how to spell Tolkien, which is why he had always written it the wrong way too. The episode closed captioning was updated immediately after the air date to reflect the new spelling everywhere it appeared in current episodes. The show's streaming presence was updated. The character became, officially and permanently, Token Black. What the show could not update was 25 years of evidence that the original spelling was the real one. The South Park Fandom Wiki's trivia page for The Big Fix documents this in detail. Tolkien's name was seen spelled out as Token on multiple occasions throughout the show, not just in captions or credits, but in the actual visual world of the episodes themselves. In the season 9 episode Wing, he signs a record contract. The name on that contract reads Token. In the season 7 episode South Park is Gay, he wears a pink metrosexual jacket as part of an episode-long joke about a fashion trend. His name is written on that jacket. It reads Token. In the season 16 episode Raising the Bar, a production company label appears on screen bearing the name Token Black Prod. In all three of these cases, the character is either holding an object that displays his name, wearing his name on his body, or identified by name in a professional context. These are not background details that could be explained away as other characters writing the name wrong. The jacket with his name on it was his jacket. He presumably owned it before the episode began. The record contract he signed himself. In the world of the show, as it existed for 25 seasons, the character knew how to spell his own name and spelled it Token every time. The Big Fix attempts to account for this. The episode's framing suggests that Stan and Randy, and by extension the audience, were the ones who had always been wrong, while the character himself had always been Tolkien. But the visual evidence from the show's own episodes does not support that framing. The character wrote his name down as Token with his own hand. The retcon requires the audience to accept something the show itself contradicted 3 separate times in 3 separate episodes across 3 separate seasons. There is also the surname problem. Before the name became Token Black, the character was identified in early appearances as Token William. The last name Williams was quietly dropped and replaced with Black at some point in the early seasons, making this the second name change the character underwent before the 2022 retcon became the third. The South Park Fandom Wiki lists his full history as originally Token Williams, then Token Black, then retconned to Tolkien Black in 2022. 3 versions of the same character's name across the show's run, with no in-universe explanation offered for any of the transitions. The 2022 retcon also created an immediate problem for the show's video game. South Park has 2 major role-playing games, The Stick of Truth, released in 2014, and The Fractured But Whole, released in 2017. Both games were developed and completed before The Big Fix aired. Both games used the name Token Token throughout. After the episode aired, players posted on the Steam community forums asking whether the games would be updated to reflect the change. A Ubisoft developer responded directly on those forums. The response confirmed that the games predated the official announcement and that the character's name had been, in their words, ambiguous and never officially confirmed until the February 2022 episode. Because both the Stick of Truth and the Fractured But Whole had concluded their core development years before the retcon, the name would remain Token in those titles. The only active game at the time, South Park: Phone Destroyer, was updated to Tolkien because it was still receiving ongoing support. This means that in the current state of the South Park universe, two major games call the character Token. One game calls him Tolkien, and the television show now calls him Tolkien, while its own older episodes contain visual evidence of the character writing his name as Token. The franchise is not consistent with itself across any single platform. The show's own response to the evidence problem is built into the episode itself, because the big fix establishes that Stan and Randy were the ones mishearing the name. Their dialogue in the episode continues to have the name subtitled as Token even after they learn the truth, because from their perspective, they are still processing a correction they have only just received. Characters who already knew the correct spelling used Tolkien. This was a deliberate writing choice to acknowledge the audience's 25 years of familiarity with the old name while officially retiring it. What this approach cannot address is the jacket, the contract, and the production label. Those objects exist in the show's physical world, not in Stan and Randy's perception of that world. They are not a result of anyone mishearing anything. They are written text that appeared on screen in episodes that aired years before the big fix. The show has no available explanation for why the character's own belongings displayed a spelling that the show now says was always wrong. The retcon was clearly intentional and clearly meaningful. The original Token name was always a joke about tokenism, the practice of including one member of a minority group in an otherwise homogeneous setting, to create the appearance of diversity without any genuine inclusion. Naming the character after that practice was the show being direct about what it was doing. Changing the name to Tolkien in 2022 was the show deciding to retire that particular joke and give the character something that did not define him entirely through the lens of his race and his function as a diversity placeholder. Whether that decision was the right creative call is a separate conversation. The continuity damage it caused is documented and real. The show built 25 years of visual evidence for one spelling, announced that the spelling had always been wrong, and now exists in a state where no single version of the franchise, television episodes, streaming platform, video games, is fully consistent with any other. The character also had a voice change early in the show's run that has never been formally addressed. In his very first appearances, Tolkien was voiced by Trey Parker. Beginning in 2000, the character was taken over by Adrian Beard, the show's art director, who has performed the role ever since. The handoff was quiet and unannounced. No episode acknowledged it. The character simply began sounding different one season and continued sounding different from that point forward. Beard has spoken about voicing the character over the years and has been part of the show's production in multiple capacities. His takeover of the role made practical and creative sense, but the transition itself added one more layer to a character whose identity has been revised, renamed, and revoiced across the show's run, making Tolkien Black, in purely factual terms, one of the most heavily retconned background characters in animated television history. He appeared in the very first episode of the show. He has been present for most of the series. He became a more prominent presence in later seasons as the show gave him more material and more screen time. And through all of that, the basic facts of who he is and what his name means have shifted underneath him 3 times. Once with the last name, once with the voice, and once with the first name in a way that the show's own archive of visual evidence refuses to fully support. There is a specific kind of chaos that comes from a show changing something about a character that the character himself had already confirmed on screen. The jacket exists, the contract exists, the production label exists, they are in the episode. They will always be in the episodes. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Name changes in South Park are not rare. They are actually a pattern, one that runs deeper than most people watching the show have ever noticed. Because the character who had it happen to him most visibly was Tolkien, but the practice of quietly shifting what characters are called, who they are related to, and where they came from stretches across almost every major family in South Park. And 2 of those families, the ones at the absolute center of the show, have origin stories that directly contradict each other depending on which season is doing the telling. Section 4, Kyle's origin. 2 completely incompatible backstories. Kyle Broflovsky has lived in South Park his entire life. That much has always been clear. He goes to school there, his parents own a house house there, his whole world is contained within that small Colorado mountain town. The question of how his family got there and when and under what circumstances, that question has two answers in the show's canon, and those two answers cannot both be true at the same time. The early seasons of South Park establish across multiple episodes that the Broflovsky family moved to South Park when Kyle was approximately 3 years old. This is referenced casually and without much ceremony, the way background details tend to be referenced on the show, not in a big dramatic moment, but as a small piece of information dropped into conversation to fill out who these characters are and where they came from. Kyle and his family are from somewhere else. They arrived in South Park when he was a toddler. This was the accepted version of events for years. Season 14, episode 9. The episode is called It's a Jersey Thing, and it aired on October 13, 2010. The central plot involves people from New Jersey moving into South Park in enormous numbers, bringing their aggressive personalities and their reality television behavior with them, and the town struggling to push back against the invasion. It is a broad parody of the Jersey Shore cultural moment, and it is structured around the discovery that several South Park residents have New Jersey roots they had kept hidden. The biggest reveal in the episode involves Sheila Broflovsky, Kyle's mother. In the middle of the episode, Sheila admits that she is originally from New Jersey. She was a different person there, loud, aggressive, known by the nickname S-Wow Titty Bang, a party girl who ran with the Jersey crowd and behaved in all the ways the episode is satirizing. She moved away from that life. She became the version of herself that South Park has always known, a concerned, overprotective, loudly opinionated Jewish mother who campaigns against things she finds offensive and says what when something shocks her. Then the episode reveals what this means for Kyle. Sheila tells her son that he is technically from New Jersey, not in the sense that he grew up there or remembers it. He has no memory of New Jersey at all. The reason is that when Sheila became pregnant with Kyle, she and Gerald were living with Sheila's parents in Newark. They were there for the first 2 months of the pregnancy. Then they left. They moved away from New Jersey while Kyle was still developing before birth. He was born after the move, meaning he came into the world somewhere other than New Jersey, but the conception happened in Newark, and the show treats that as enough. The episode uses this as a plot device. Being conceived in New Jersey, according to the episode's internal logic, leaves a mark on a person. Kyle begins transforming when exposed to Jersey people. He becomes Kylie B, an aggressive Jersey-inflected version of himself who screams insults and behaves like the characters the episode is mocking. The transformation is framed as a curse that lives inside him because of where and how he began. The show commits to this completely within the episode's story. The problem is that this version of Kyle's origin is directly incompatible with the version the show established in earlier seasons. If the Broflovsky family moved to South Park when Kyle was approximately 3 years old, then Kyle was born somewhere and lived somewhere for 3 years before arriving in Colorado. Under this version, the family had a life outside of South Park that lasted long enough for Kyle to reach toddler age before the move happened. Under the It's a Jersey Thing version, the family left New Jersey 2 months into the pregnancy. Kyle was born after they left. He arrived in South Park before he was born. Effectively, his parents were already there by the time he came into the world. There was no 3-year period of living somewhere else first. The move happened before Kyle's birth, not when he was a toddler. Both of these cannot be true. Either the family moved when Kyle was 3, or the family moved before he was born. The show presents both as facts in different episodes without acknowledging that they contradict each other. The South Park fan wiki addresses this directly. The entry for Sheila Broflovsky notes that earlier episodes mentioned the family moved to South Park when Kyle was about 3, and that It's a Jersey Thing creates an incompatibility with that established history by making the move happen during the pregnancy instead. The contradiction is documented, acknowledged by the fan community, and has never been addressed by the show itself. There is a second problem created by It's a Jersey Thing that sits on top of the first one. The season 4 episode Chicken Pox establishes that Gerald Broflovsky and Stuart McCormick, Kenny's father, were close friends when they were younger. The episode is built around this old friendship and the way class differences eventually separated the two men. Gerald grew up comfortable, Stuart grew up poor, and their lives diverged in ways that left them in the same small town but living completely different existences. If Gerald grew up in South Park, close enough to Stuart McCormick to form the kind of deep childhood friendship Chicken Pox describes, then the story of him living in New Jersey with Sheila during the early months of her pregnancy requires some additional explanation. When did Gerald leave South Park? When did he move to New Jersey? When did he come back? The show never establishes this sequence. One possible reading is that Gerald was born and raised in South Park, left at some point to attend college, met Sheila there or in New Jersey, got her pregnant while they were living with her parents in Newark, and then brought her back to South Park, his hometown, before Kyle was born. Under this reading, Gerald returning to South Park would be a homecoming, not a relocation, which would explain his existing friendship with Stuart and make the Jersey story compatible with chickenpox. The show never confirms this reading. It is the version of events that makes the most pieces fit together, but no episode states it. The wiki for Sheila Broflovsky notes this tension explicitly, pointing out that either the Gerald-Stuart friendship or the New Jersey origin story may exist outside the show's reliable timeline, since episode has ever built a bridge between them. What makes this particular continuity problem more interesting than a simple name change or a visual error is that both versions of Kyle's backstories were written with deliberate intent. The early season version of the Broflovskys, as a family that relocated to South Park, was a small character detail that gave Kyle a sense of history. The It's a Jersey Thing version was the backbone of an entire episode's plot. The Jersey origin was not background flavor. It was the engine that drove the story and produced the Kylie B transformation, and the entire emotional arc of Kyle processing a secret about himself he had never known. Both pieces of writing were intentional. Neither was a mistake in the sense of someone typing the wrong number or forgetting a character's name. They were two different creative decisions made in different seasons that happened to describe the same event in incompatible ways. This is something that happens more often in South Park than in most long-running animated shows, because South Park's production speed is genuinely extraordinary. Parker and Stone have famously produced episodes in as little as 6 days. The show has aired episodes that were written, animated, recorded, and broadcast within a single week in response to current events. At that pace, maintaining a detailed internal record of every small piece of character history established across 20+ seasons is an enormous task, and the show has never treated tight continuity as a priority the way some other series do. The result is that certain characters, the ones who started as background figures and gradually became more important, tend to accumulate contradictions as the show adds new layers to their histories without always checking what was already there. Kyle's family is one of the clearest examples. The Broflovskys grew from a generic family unit in season 1 into characters with specific histories, specific relationships, and specific origin stories. Each new piece of information was added when it was needed for the episode being made that week, not necessarily cross-referenced against everything that had come before. The contradiction about when the family arrived in South Park has never been addressed in any episode. No character has tried to reconcile the two timelines. The show simply contains both of them in different episodes, describing the same historical moment in different ways. It moves forward as if the question was never complicated. Kyle himself as a character is defined partly by his sense of belonging in South Park, his connection to the town, his role as the moral voice in the group, his relationships with people he has grown up alongside. The specifics of when his family arrived and under what circumstances have never been central to who he is as a character. The show trades on who Kyle is in the present. His past is a detail that surfaces when an episode needs it and disappears when it does not, but the detail it surfaces with changes depending on the season, and those two versions of the same detail sit in the show's archive, unresolved, pointing in opposite directions. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Kyle's origin story is one family's worth of timeline confusion. The same kind of problem, a character's background shifting depending on which episode is doing the telling, runs through almost every major family in South Park. Some of those shifts are small, some are names that changed quietly between seasons, and some of them involve a father and a son whose names were never wrong at all, according to the show, because whoever wrote the name down first simply hadn't figured out yet who this person was going to be. Section 5, Butter's dad's two names, Chris Weiss. Stephen Butterscotch is one of the most recognizable characters in South Park. His cheerfulness, his complete inability to understand when something bad is happening to him, his relationship with parents who ground him for things that are not his fault, all of that has been consistent across the show's run in a way that makes him feel like one of the most stable presences in the series. He is reliable. He is always Butters. He is always wearing that teal jacket and those brown pants and that expression of gentle confusion that never quite hardens into anything darker, even when it probably should. His father, on the other hand, spent the early part of the show going by a completely different name than the one the audience eventually learned to associate with him. In season 5, episode 14, Butters' very own episode, which aired on December 12, 2001, Butters' father is named Chris, not Steven, not Steve, Chris. The episode is a significant one in the show's history because it is the episode that elevated Butters from a recurring background presence to a character with his own story, his own family dynamics, and his own emotional weight. It introduced the full portrait of the Stotch household, the controlling father, the unstable mother, and the cheerful son caught between between them, and in that episode, the father's name is Chris. The story that unfolds in Butters' very own episode is one of the darker half hours the show produced in its early season. Butters' mother sends him to spy on his father to find out what anniversary present he is planning to buy her. Butters follows his father and discovers that his dad has been spending time at a gay bathhouse, engaging in sexual activity with other men. Butters does not fully understand what he has seen. He takes photographs. He shows them to his mother while describing what he witnessed in the innocent terms of a child who genuinely cannot process what the images mean. His mother's reaction is severe. She drives Butters to a lake, pushes the car into the water with Butters inside, and walks away. Butters survives by crawling out a window. His mother, consumed by what she has just done, attempts to cover the whole thing up by claiming Butters was kidnapped. His father, now publicly exposed for his behavior at the bathhouse, announces it all himself in a press conference, seemingly under the belief that honesty is the best approach. The family's dysfunction is laid out completely in this single episode. Throughout all of it, the father is Chris. Then the show continued. Butters became a more prominent character. His father appeared more frequently, and somewhere in the episodes that followed, the name shifted from Chris to Steven, and kept going as Steven from that point forward, never returning to Chris, never explaining the change, never having any character acknowledge that the name had been different before. The TV Tropes recap page for Butters' very own episode flags this directly under a section it calls Early Installment Weirdness, noting that Butters' dad Steven is still called Chris at this point in the show. The IMDb entry for the episode goes further, listing the name discrepancy and classifying it not as a production error, but as an intentional change made to the character once his role became more prominent within the show. That classification, intentional change, is what makes this case different from a simple mistake. The writers did not type the wrong name and failed to catch it. They made a decision at some point between season 5 and the seasons that followed to rename this character, and they made that decision without building any bridge between the old name and the new one. The show simply started calling him Steven and kept going. The South Park official X account acknowledged this in September 2014, posting, "Butters' dad Steven is one of many characters who've undergone a name change. In early seasons, he was known as Chris." The hashtag attached was South Park history, which frames it as a piece of behind-the-scenes trivia rather than an error, something the show is aware of and categorizes as part of its own evolution rather than something it needs to fix. But the South Park Fandom Wiki's entry for Steven Stotch contains a detail that suggests the name change never fully took hold even within the show's own scripts. The entry notes that Linda Stotch, Butters' mother, constantly changes between calling her husband Steven and calling him Chris, even in episodes that aired long after the name was supposed to have settled on Steven. The wiki offers a working explanation. Since Steven is used more often than Chris, Chris may be either an ongoing error in the scripts or a nickname that Linda uses inconsistently. This is a notable problem. The name change was meant to standardize the character's identity as he became more important to the show. The standardization apparently did not reach every script that was written afterward. There are later episodes in which Butters' mother calls her husband Chris, after the show had already committed to Steven as the correct name, and those episodes aired without correction. The result is a character who has two names, both of which appear in the show, with no in-universe reason given for either of them being used at any particular time. What makes this sit alongside the larger pattern in South Park rather than standing alone as a minor quirk is the company it keeps. The name change involving Butters' father is one instance in a documented series of similar changes across the show's main cast and their family. The show's own wiki notes this explicitly in the Steven Stotch entry, pointing out that several minor characters have had their names changed, and that even more prominent recurring characters have inconsistent surnames. Jimmy Swanson became Jimmy Valmer. The change happened across the show's run without any episode drawing attention to it. Timmy's last name has been listed differently in different sources. Token Williams became Token Black before becoming Tolkien Black 25 years later. The pattern across all of these cases is the same. South Park was built extremely fast, in its early seasons especially, with a production pace that left little room for maintaining detailed records of every small decision made in every episode. Characters who began as background figures or as one-episode presences did not have fully developed identities when they first appeared. Their names were placeholders, essentially, functional labels that allowed scripts to be written and dialogue to be assigned, without requiring the writers to have fully decided who these people were going to be. When those background figures became important, when Butters graduated from background kid to main character, when his father graduated from unnamed presence to recurring personality, the show made decisions about who they were going to be going forward. Those decisions sometimes matched what had been established established in earlier episodes. Sometimes they did not. And when they did not, the show moved forward with the new version and let the old version sit in the archive without comment. Butters' father, a character, is interesting precisely because of how the show eventually developed him. Stephen Stotch, as he became known, is not a simple villain or a simple incompetent. The show built him into something more complicated, a man who is genuinely harsh with his son, who grounds Butters for things that are not reasonable, who applies a heavy and often cruel discipline to a child who does not deserve it. But the same character has also shown genuine love for Butters in specific episodes, creating a portrait of a parent whose failures are real, but whose care is not entirely absent. The episode Casa Bonita, a season 7 episode in which Cartman manipulates the situation to get invited to Butters' birthday outing, contains a moment where Steven demonstrates actual warmth toward his son. It sits alongside episodes in which the same man grounds Butters for being the victim of circumstances entirely outside his control. The show never resolves this tension into a clean verdict on who Stephen Stotch is. He is inconsistent because the show treats that inconsistency as realistic. Most people are not entirely one thing. None of that character complexity existed when the father first appeared in season 5 as Chris. He was a plot device in that episode, a figure whose secret behavior drove the story and whose public reaction provided the episode's dark punchline. The decision to develop him into a recurring presence with his own arc came later, and with it came the name change. And with the name change came all the small inconsistencies that follow, when a character's identity is rebuilt in motion across multiple seasons, without a single moment where the show pauses and says, here is who this person actually is. A father who is sometimes Chris and sometimes Steven, who sometimes gets called the wrong name by his own wife in episodes that post-date the official name change, is the clearest example of something that runs all the way through South Park's history. The show builds its characters the same way its production schedule demands everything be built, quickly, intuitively, in response to what the current episode needs, with less attention to what came before than a viewer tracking the details across decades would prefer. The name changes are not accidents. They are evidence of a show that grew faster than its own records could keep up with. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, and the Stotch family is not even the most complicated case of this, because there is a character in South Park who was designed in season 1 without any backstory at all, who later had an entire origin assigned to him based entirely on the way his face was drawn, and whose connection to the rest of the show's worlds only exists because of a visual coincidence that Parker and Stone noticed after the fact and decided to make permanent. Section 6. Sheila's original name was Carol, and she is not the only one. There is an episode in season 1 where 2 of the 4 main boys' mothers share the same first name. Neither of them is using the name that audiences would eventually come to know them by. Both of them are called Carol in the same episode, in the same scenes, as if the writers had not yet fully decided that these were going to be 2 distinct people with 2 distinct identities, rather than interchangeable background figures fulfilling the same narrative function. The episode is called Death. It is season 1, episode 6. The plot involves the boy's grandpa asking Stan to help him die because he is old and miserable, while the parents, led by Kyle's mother, organize a campaign against Terrence and Philip, the Canadian comedy show the boys love. The parents find the show offensive and want it taken off the air. They march, they protest, they apply the kind of organized parent pressure that the show would return to repeatedly across its run whenever it needed adults to be the obstacle rather than the solution. In this episode, Kyle's mother is named Carol. Stan's mother is also named Carol. Both of them in the same episode. The same name assigned to 2 different women in the same group of parents fighting the same campaign. The South Park Archives wiki entry for Sheila Broflovsky states this plainly. She was referred to as Carol in this episode along with Sharon Marsh. The show had not yet committed to who either of these women were going to be, and the placeholder name it reached for was the same one in both cases. What happened next is documented and specific. Kyle's mother stopped being Carol and became Sheila. Stan's mother stopped being Carol and became Sharon. Both women received distinct identities as the show developed distinct personalities, distinct roles within their families and within the town. Sheila Broflovsky became the loudest voice in any room she entered, the mother who would launch a war with Canada over a television show, the woman whose outrage was always genuine even when what she was outraged about was completely disproportionate to the situation. Sharon Marsh became a quieter presence, someone who watched the chaos around her with a kind of exhausted clarity that the show occasionally gave real weight to. The name Carol did not disappear from South Park, it was reassigned. Kenny McCormick's mother, the woman who has been giving birth to Kenny and losing him, and giving birth to him again across the show's entire run, is named Carol McCormick, the same name that was briefly used for for 2 different women in season 1 was handed to a third character and kept there permanently. This is not a coincidence or an error that was subsequently exploited for convenience. The South Park Loathsome Characters wiki entry for Sheila Broflovsky states this directly. She was originally named Carol in her first appearance in the episode Death, and the name was then given to Kenny McCormick's mother. The transfer was intentional. The name had been used, was no longer needed by the characters it had been assigned to, and was placed on a new character where it has remained ever since. The reason any of this happened is rooted in something the South Park Archives acknowledges in its entry for Sheila Broflovsky. Kyle's family surname, Broflovsky, is derived from the real maiden name of Matt Stone's mother, whose original family name was Brozlovsky. That name was changed to Belasco when her ancestors immigrated to the United States. Stone named the family after his own mother's original name. Sheila Broflovsky is named after Stone's mother directly, Sheila Stone. Gerald Broflovsky is named after Stone's father, Gerald Stone. The wiki notes that this real-world connection may explain why the family's surname was spelled inconsistently across the early seasons of the show. It appears in early episodes as Brozlowski, as Brovlovsky, and in other variations before settling permanently on Broflovsky. The name was being transliterated from memory and from a family history rather than from a fixed written source, and the spelling shifted until the writers committed to one version and standardized it. The inconsistency in the early seasons, a name spelled differently across different episodes, a mother called Carol before she was called Sheila, reflects something genuine about how the show was made in its first year. South Park launched in August 1997 and immediately became one of the most talked about shows on television. The production pace was extreme from the beginning. Characters who appeared in the background of early episodes were not always fully designed as people yet. They were shapes and scenes, voices in crowds, functional presences, who could deliver a line or fill a role without needing a complete history behind them. Kyle's mother in Death needed to lead a parent campaign. She needed to be the loudest voice in the room and the most committed to the cause. She did not, at that point in the show's development, need a name that would still be hers 20 seasons later. She got Carol because Carol was a name, and a name was what the script required. The process of building these background figures into real characters happened gradually and without a formal plan. Sheila Broflovsky did not become the fully developed person she is now in a single moment. She accumulated details across episodes: her speech patterns, her relationship with Gerald, her history with Ike's adoption, her capacity for genuine care underneath the loudness and the overcorrection. Each of those details was added when an episode needed it, and occasionally those additions contradicted what had come before, as the case of Kyle's origin story in Section 4 already demonstrated. Sharon Marsh followed a similar trajectory. She began as Carol in Death, became Sharon, and gradually developed into a character with her own perspective on the madness of South Park, particularly the madness centered on her husband Randy. Her role expanded significantly in the seasons where Randy became a more dominant presence, partly because the show needed someone to react to Randy's escalating behavior from a position of proximity and exhausted familiarity. The name Carol, meanwhile, settled on Kenny's mother and stayed there. Carol McCormick is a recurring presence in the show. She appears in episodes involving Kenny's home life, his poverty, his family's circumstances. She is in the background of the Mysterian arc when Kenny's immortality is explained through his parents' connection to the Cthulhu cult. She gives birth to Kenny after his deaths, under the explanation provided in Season 4 and expanded in Season 14. The name that briefly belonged to two of the show's most prominent mothers now belongs permanently to a woman whose defining characteristic is that she keeps losing and regaining the same son. There is something almost structurally poetic about this, though it was almost certainly not planned. The name Carol migrated from the mothers of the show's most morally vocal character and its most grounded character to the mother of the show's most disposable character, the one who dies constantly, returns constantly, and is mourned constantly by a mother who never gets to keep him for long. The broader pattern that this case belongs to is one of the most consistent things about South Park as a production. The show does not build its world from a detailed blueprint. It builds it the way a fast sketch artist works, with confidence and speed and a willingness to go back over earlier lines when the picture needs to develop in a new direction. Some of those earlier lines get erased cleanly. Some of them remain visible underneath the new work, creating a layering effect where the original version and the revised version both exist in the archive simultaneously. Carol existing as two characters in one episode before becoming a third character entirely is the erasure that did not go completely clean. The name is still there, now attached to someone new. The original two Carols are still there in Season 1, Episode 6, for anyone who goes back to watch it. And the explanation for why this happened, the speed of production, the gradual development of background figures, the lack of a fixed reference sheet for every detail of every character is the same explanation that covers the name changes involving Butter's father, the Broflovsky surname spelling variation, the shifting of Token Williams to Token Black to Tolkien Black, and the various other small corrections the show made to its own world as it figured out what that world was going to be. None of these early inconsistencies were malicious or even particularly careless by the standards of what the show was attempting. South Park was being made faster than almost any other animated program in television history. The miracle is not that Carol appeared twice in the same season 1 episode and then disappeared from both characters who used it. The miracle is that the show built coherent, lasting, genuinely beloved characters at the speed it was working at, and that most of the early inconsistencies are small enough to require close attention to notice. Most of them, not all of them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, because there is one character whose entire backstory, whose very reason for existing in the form he exists in, was invented after the fact, based on nothing more than a drawing choice that was made before anyone had decided who he was. His origin was not changed. His origin was created retroactively to explain a design decision, and then the show built episodes and relationships and emotional history on top of a foundation that was assembled entirely in reverse. Section 7, the Ike retroactive retcon. A character made Canadian after the fact Ike Broflovsky was in South Park before anyone had decided what he was. He appears in the very first episode. Cartman gets an anal probe, season 1, episode 1, as Kyle's baby brother. He is small, he is round, he has beady little eyes and a head that is made of 2 separate pieces that open and close when he moves his mouth like a crude puppet. Kyle kicks him like a football in that first episode, which becomes a recurring gag. The baby brother, who gets launched through the air and lands without complaint. Because he is a baby and babies in South Park are indestructible in the specific way that all South Park characters are indestructible when the show needs them to be. At the time of that first episode, Ike's design was simply how he looked. There was no reason attached to it. He was a baby, drawn in a particular way, existing in Kyle's family as a younger sibling. The design choices that gave him those beady eyes and that split head were not connected to any larger decision about who he was or where he came from. He was drawn that way because that was how the animators drew him. Then the show introduced Terrence and Phillip. Terrence and Phillip are Canadian. They appear as a show within the show, a Canadian comedy program that the boys love and the parents despise, built around extremely simple fart jokes delivered by 2 men whose entire visual identity consists of beady eyes and heads made of 2 separate pieces that flap open and closed like puppets when they talk. The same construction as Ike, the same eye, the same fundamental design logic applied to adult Canadian men that had already been applied, without any particular reason, to Kyle's baby brother. Parker and Stone noticed this. The SouthParkCC.com wiki's entry for the episode Ike's Wee Wee, Season 2, Episode 3, states this directly and without ambiguity. Trey and Matt did not originally plan for Ike to be Canadian. Once the characters Terrence and Phillip were established to be Canadian, soon all Canadian characters on the show shared the same design of having beady eyes and a floppy head made up of 2 halves. Ike was retroactively made a Canadian based on his visual similarity. That sentence, retroactively made a Canadian based on his visual similarity, is the entire origin of Ike Broflovsky's backstory. He looked like a Canadian. Canadian characters had been given a specific design. He shared that design. Therefore, the writers decided he must be Canadian. And if he is Canadian, and his family is Jewish and American, then he must have been adopted. And if he was adopted, there needs to be a reason his birth parents gave him up. And if there is a reason, it needs to be established in an episode. All of that backward construction landed in Ike's Wee Wee, which aired on May 20th, 1998, roughly 9 months after the first episode in which Ike appeared with his Canadian design and no Canadian identity. The episode reveals that Ike is adopted. Kyle finds out when he sees a Canadian flag on what he believes is Ike's grave at a funeral. He confronts his parents. Gerald and Sheila admit the truth. Ike was born in Canada. His birth name was Peter Gintz. His birth parents, Harry and Elise Gintz, gave him up for adoption because Canada had been devastated by the Cola Wars, a fictional conflict in the show's universe that left the country unable to support family. The Broflovsks adopted him and brought him to South Park, where he has been Kyle's brother ever since. This origin story was not waiting in the background for the right moment to be revealed. The Wikipedia entry for Ike's Wee Wee confirms this plainly. The episode introduces Ike's backstory as a Canadian infant adopted by the Broflovskis. It was introduced in Season 2 because the writers decided in Season 2 that this was who Ike was. Before that episode aired, Ike did not have this history. He had a design and a role, Kyle's little brother, and nothing else. The retroactive origin creates one design problem that the show has handled in different ways across different seasons. Every Canadian character in South Park shares their specific physical traits: the beady eyes, the split flapping head, and no nose. Ike has the eyes, Ike has the split head, Ike has a nose. No other Canadian character in the show has a nose. When the Canadian design rules were being established through Terrence and Philip, the nose was apparently not included as a required feature, or it was left off later Canadian characters but was already present in Ike's original design and could not be removed without changing a character who had already appeared on screen. The show addresses this inconsistency in Season 5, Episode 5, Terrence and Philip, Behind the Blow. The episode is structured as a documentary about Terrence and Philip, and it includes footage of the two comedians as children. The child versions of Terrence and Philip look like Ike. They have noses, they have the split head design, but they also have facial features that make them look less like the adult Canadian puppet design and more like a regular South Park child. The implication the show builds into this is that Canadian babies look like Ike with noses and only develop the fully noseless adult Canadian appearance as they grow up. This is the show creating an explanation for a design inconsistency using another episode's background detail. It does not fully resolve the question of why Ike still has a nose after multiple seasons of existing on the show. Babies presumably grow up. Ike is still a toddler across most of the show's run, which means he exists in a prolonged state of pre-nose loss development. Whether this was planned or is simply the most available explanation for a problem the show created by deciding Ike was Canadian after the design was already set, the show's own wiki does not say. What the show does confirm is that Ike's nose situation eventually resolves itself in the future. The special South Park, post-COVID, set in a version of South Park's future, shows an adult Ike who speaks in the full Canadian manner, using words like buddy, guy, and friend the way all Canadian characters on the show do. The South Park fandom wiki's entry for Ike confirms this. In the future timeline of post-COVID, Ike speaks in the typical Canadian manner. When he grows up to his adult stage, he gains these features and loses his nose. The nose disappears. The Canadian design completes itself. The inconsistency resolves at the end of his development arc, just not within the timeline of the main series, where he remains a toddler and retains the nose that made him look different from every other Canadian character on the show. The adoption itself, once established, became the foundation for genuine story. Season 7, Episode 15, It's Christmas in Canada, builds an entire episode around Ike's biological parents, Harry and Elise Gintz, who come to South Park and claim they want Ike back. The boys travel to Canada to sort out the situation. The biological parents are shown to love Ike, though the feeling is not mutual. Ike does not appear to love them back and only changes his mind about going with them when he is offered chocolate. The Broflovskis, particularly Sheila and Gerald, are shown to be devastated at the prospect of losing him, demonstrating that whatever the circumstances of the adoption, the emotional bond between the family and their adopted son is completely real. This is the show doing something with the retroactive backstory that goes beyond simply explaining a design choice. The adoption, which was invented to justify why a character who looked Canadian was living with a Jewish family in Colorado, became the basis for an episode that explores what family means when biology and choice are in conflict. The Broflovskis chose Ike. His birth parents created him. The episode asks which of those things matters more, and it answers by having Ike choose the family that raised him, then immediately complicate that choice with chocolate. The South Park fandom wiki notes that Ike's birth parents are shown to love him very much in It's Christmas in Canada, but that this love is one-sided. Ike does not seem to love them back. His emotional world, despite his Canadian origin, is entirely centered on the Broflovskis. Kyle is his brother in every way that matters to Ike. The adoption origin being retroactive does not make the relationship between the brothers feel retroactive. The show built something real on top of a decision that was made for no reason beyond visual consistency. There is one more layer to the Ike situation that is easy to miss if the focus stays on his Canadian identity. He was established early on as a genius. The South Park fandom wiki's entry for Ike notes that in the 4th season, it is revealed that Ike is a genius and is sent to kindergarten early. This is not evident at first. In later episodes, the proof of his genius becomes visible. He composes sheet music, reads John Steinbeck, and watches the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer every night. In the movie, he plays the harmonica expertly. In Smug Alert, he finishes several of Kyle's sentences when the boys are trying to explain something complicated to their father. This genius was not part of Ike's original design any more than his Canadian identity was. It was added, built into the character across later seasons, as another layer of retroactive definition. The toddler who got kicked like a football in season 1 became, through accumulated creative decisions made across multiple seasons, an adopted Canadian genius with a confirmed future adult form that resolves his nose situation and gives him the full linguistic identity of his home country. The whole thing started because his head was drawn in 2 pieces. The retroactive construction of Ike's identity is a clean and fully documented example of how South Park builds its world from the outside in, from the image toward the meaning, from the visual toward the story. The design came first, the nationality followed from the design. The adoption followed from the nationality. The origin story followed from the adoption. The biological parents followed from the origin story. The future resolution followed from the design inconsistency. Each piece was added when the show needed it, and the resulting character is internally coherent in a way that his creation absolutely was not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That process, making things up in order, each new piece responding to the last without an overall plan, is not unique to Ike. The show has been doing it from the beginning, and occasionally that process produces something that the show acknowledges as an inconsistency in real time, inside an episode, on screen, with the characters themselves pointing out that the math does not add up, and then uses a dream sequence to make the whole problem disappear. Section 8. City on the Edge of Forever. The flashback episode where every flashback is wrong. There is an episode in Season 2's where South Park looks directly at its own history and gets every single detail wrong on purpose. The episode is called City on the Edge of Forever, and it aired on June 17th, 1998. It is the 7th episode of Season 2 and the 20th episode of the entire series. The premise is simple. The school bus carrying the South Park elementary kids takes a wrong turn on a mountain road and ends up teetering on the edge of a cliff. Miss Crabtree, the bus driver, goes outside to find help. She tells the kids not to leave the bus because a big scary monster is waiting out there to eat anyone who steps off. The children, trapped and nervous and unable to go anywhere, sit in their seats and pass the time by remembering things that have happened to them in previous episodes. These memories are the entire substance of the episode. It is a clip show, a format where a television series replays footage from earlier episodes, usually to save money on production or to let new viewers catch up with the show's history. South Park takes the clip show format and does something specific to it. Every single clip is wrong. Every memory the kids describe plays out differently from how the events actually happened in the episodes being referenced. The changes are not subtle. They are complete reversals of how those scenes ended, dressed up with the same visual style as the originals but pointed in entirely different directions. Stan remembers the episode where he always vomited on Wendy whenever she spoke to him. In the actual episode, the very first episode of the series, Cartman gets an anal probe. Stan's crush on Wendy manifests as an involuntary physical reaction. Every time she approaches him or talks to him, he throws up. He never manages to speak to her properly. He never gets the moment of connection he wants. In Stan's flashback memory in City on the Edge of Forever, he sweeps Wendy off her feet and kisses her. He does it twice across the episode in 2 separate flashback sequences. The vomit is gone. The embarrassing inability to communicate is gone. In its place is the moment Stan always wanted, inserted into a memory of an episode where that moment definitively did not happen. The SouthParkCC.com wiki for the episode notes that this is the only episode in the entire show's run where Stan actually kisses Wendy. He does it twice. Both times are inside memories that the episode itself marks as inaccurate. The one thing Stan most wanted in those early seasons, a real romantic moment with the girl he had feelings for, only happened in a version of events the show explicitly labels as wrong. Mr. Garrison remembers the episode Weight Gain 4000, in which Kathy Lee Gifford comes to South Park and Garrison attempts to assassinate her with a sniper rifle from a great distance. In the actual episode, he misses. He had been building toward the shot for years before it, nursing a childhood grudge against Gifford, and when the moment finally arrived, he could not land it. In the flashback version in City on the Edge of Forever, Garrison shoots Kathy Lee Gifford successfully, and she turns out to be an alien underneath. The assassination works, the target falls, and the target was never human to begin with. Kenny remembers the episode Death, in which Death itself, a physical entity, a robed figure on a tricycle, comes to South Park and kills Kenny. In the actual episode, Kenny died. That is how this encounter ends, because death wins when death comes for you, which is the entire logic of what death is. In the flashback version, Kenny fights back. He knocks Death off the tricycle. He stomps on Death repeatedly. He defeats Death while yelling, and this one's for me over and over, which the South Park fandom wiki notes actually makes a specific kind of sense given that Kenny has died and come back so many times that he is essentially registering each previous death as a separate grievance being settled in this one fight. The logic is absurd, but it is internally consistent with what the show has established about Kenny's relationship with dying. In addition to these, there is a flashback that does not reference South Park at all. One of the kids remembers Fonzie from Happy Days jumping over a line of garbage cans on his motorcycle. The Fonzie clip is presented in the same format as the South Park memories, slotted in between them as if it belongs there, treated by the kids as a genuine shared memory, even though it is from a completely different television television show that aired decades before any of them were born. The reason Fonzie is in the episode is that Henry Winkler, the actor who played Fonzie, is providing the voice of the monster outside the bus. The clip is both a joke about the randomness of the format and a tribute to the persons doing the voice work, and it sits inside an episode that is already openly mocking the idea that flashback sequences represent accurate history. Each of the flashback sequences ends the same way. Whoever is telling the story concludes it with the phrase "now." That's what I call a sticky situation, and everyone in the bus laughs. Then another kid points out that the ending just described is not what actually happened. The laughter stops. The correct version of events is acknowledged. Then someone else starts a new memory, and the whole process begins again, slightly wrong in a new direction. This structure is the show performing a specific kind of comedy, the comedy of a format exposing its own dishonesty. Clip show episodes exist partly as a cost-saving measure, because reusing old footage is cheaper than producing new animation. They also exist as a device to remind audiences of events they may have forgotten, or to bring new viewers up to speed on a show's history. South Park takes both of those functions and undercuts them completely. The memories cost just as much to produce as new footage because they are not actually old footage. They are new scenes animated to look like old footage but depicting things that never happened. And they do not remind the audience of anything accurately. They misrepresent every event they reference. The South Park Fandom Wiki's trivia page for City on the Edge of Forever documents one specific in-episode acknowledgement of the Kenny continuity problem that the flashbacks created. In one of Cartman's flashbacks, the sequence where Fonzie jumps the garbage can, Cartman mentions that Kenny died at some point during the events being remembered. Stan and Kyle immediately object. They point out that Kenny could not have died then because he just died 8 hours ago from the monster that grabbed him off the bus. Kenny dying twice in the same day is impossible even within the show's own flexible logic about Kenny dying. Cartman considers this and responds, "Oh yeah, I guess that does not make sense." The show is having a character acknowledge inside the episode that the Kenny death gag has an internal consistency problem. Kenny dies every episode, but within any given episode he dies once. Having 2 deaths in a single day requires the show to admit that the running gag has edges, places where its own logic bumps into itself and produces an absurd result. Cartman's casual acknowledgement and immediate acceptance of the problem is the show handling this the way it handles most of its continuity difficulties, by noticing the problem out loud and then moving past it without fixing it. The framing device that contains all of this is a dream. After everything that happened, the flashbacks, the monster Miz, Crabtree's adventure outside the bus involving a truck driver and a career in stand-up comedy, it is revealed that the entire episode has been a dream inside another dream. Stan wakes up from dreaming about the bus. Then he wakes up again from dreaming about the bus. The dream within a dream ending is the show's most direct available tool for dissolving continuity problem. If everything happened inside a dream, then nothing that was inconsistent or impossible actually happened at all. The wrongness of the flashbacks is explained by the dream. The Kenny double death problem is dissolved inside the dream. The monster, the cliff, the entire situation, all of it becomes something Stan's sleeping brain produced rather than something that actually occurred in South Park. The South Park Fandom Wiki's entry on the episode acknowledges this directly, describing the episode as something that abuses and makes fun of flashbacks used in a narrative, as well as the all just a dream ending cliche. The show is not just using the dream device, it is mocking the dream device while using it, pointing at its own escape hatch, and calling attention to the fact that it is an escape hatch. This is South Park's characteristic way of having something both ways. The dream ending allows the episode to be consequence-free while the show simultaneously makes fun of consequence-free dream ending. There are additional continuity problems inside the episode that exist in the real framing story rather than inside the dreams, which means the dream ending does not cover them. The South Park trivia page for City on the Edge of Forever documents that the occupancy of the bus is inconsistent throughout the entire episode. Characters disappear and reappear in different seats between shots. Wendy Testaberger appears sitting in front of Stan and Kyle during one sequence, despite not appearing in any shots before or after that moment in the episode. The bus full of children cannot maintain a consistent head count from one scene to the next. Craig Tucker appears to die during the real framing story, not inside any of the dream sequences. When the bus tilts on the cliff edge and the kids scramble to hold on, Craig falls out of a window and screams as he drops. He survives in the actual South Park continuity. Craig Tucker is a recurring character who appears in many later episodes, but within the episode, his fall out of the window is presented as a real event in the real framing story, not as part of a dream. He falls, he screams. The show moves on without acknowledging whether he survived or what happened to him after he hit the ground. He simply reappears in later episodes, alive, with no reference reference to having fallen out of a school bus on the edge of a cliff. The monster outside the bus is presented as genuinely real within the framing story as well. It grabs Kenny off the bus and carries him away. Kenny's disappearance is treated as a real death within the episode's framing, not a dream death, but an actual one. Given that the entire framing story then turns out to be Stan's dream, Kenny's death in this episode technically did not happen in the show's continuity. But the show's wiki counts the episode among Kenny's deaths, because the show itself is not entirely consistent about which deaths count as real and which do not. Miss Crabtree's storyline runs parallel to the children's situation throughout the episode. She leaves the bus to find help and immediately encounters a truck driver named Marcus, who picks her up. She accidentally consumes a large amount of what she believes are aspirin, but are actually something entirely different. The substances, rather than incapacitating her, make her calmer, because she is apparently too volatile for them to work on her in the expected way. Marcus takes her to a venue. A theatrical agent discovers her. She becomes a successful stand-up comedian. Her story ends with a career she never had before and a life completely different from the one she drove a school bus in. At the end of the episode, after Stan wakes up the second time, Miss Crabtree returns to the bus as if nothing has happened. Her entire adventure, the truck driver, the substances, the comedy career, the new life is simply over. She is back in the driver's seat. The children are fine. The cliff is gone. The monster is gone. Everything has reset, except that none of the children's adventures were real because they were inside Stan's dream, which means Ms. Crabtree's adventure was also part of what Stan dreamed, which means the truck driver and the comedy career, and all of it were products of Stan's sleeping imagination. The episode presents her storyline as running parallel to Stan's dream rather than inside it, using a split narrative structure where the children's sequences and Crabtree's sequences alternate. But if all the children's sequences are a dream and Ms. Crabtree's sequences exist in the same episode, the logical conclusion is that she was dreamed too, which she presumably was not intended to be. The show does not resolve this. The dream ending covers what it needs to cover and leaves everything else in a state of productive ambiguity. City on the Edge of Forever is the episode where South Park most clearly demonstrates its relationship to its own continuity, which is that the show treats continuity as material to be used rather than as a rule to be followed. The wrong flashbacks are funny because they are wrong. The dream ending is funny because dream endings are a lazy device, and the show knows it and says so. The Kenny Double Death acknowledgement is funny because the show is catching itself in an impossibility and shrugging at it. The bus occupancy problems and Craig's unexplained survival are not funny. They are simply the byproduct of an episode produced at speed that did not have time to track every character in every frame. The whole episode is South Park holding a mirror up to the kind of show it is, one that moves too fast to be perfectly accurate, that treats its own history as something to play with rather than something to preserve, and that uses comedy to acknowledge the places where the internal logic does not hold together. That acknowledgement has always been funnier than perfect continuity would have been. The show has never disagreed with this. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet for all the time South Park has pointed at its own inconsistencies and laughed, there is one situation in the show's history that is not funny in any of the ways the show's usual errors are funny. One case where a real person left or was removed from the show under circumstances that have never been fully explained, where the show's response was immediate and brutal and built out of genuine anger, and where the truth of what actually happened remains more than 15 years later, something nobody has been able to fully establish. Section 9. The Chef Mystery. Did Isaac Hayes actually quit, or was the quit done for him? Isaac Hayes voiced Chef for 9 seasons. 9 seasons of a character who was, for much of that time, the most reliable adult presence in South Park. Chef was the school cafeteria cook, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a deep voice and an easy warmth who had seen enough of the world to have opinions about it, and who delivered those opinions to 4 elementary school boys with a kind of patient affection that no other adult in the show consistently offered them. He sang, he gave advice. He had an extraordinary and completely unashamed relationship with women that the show played for comedy without ever making him the butt of it. He was in the specific way that South Park occasionally allows its characters to be, genuinely good, not perfect, not without his own absurdities, but fundamentally on the side of the kids in a way that the other adults in town rarely managed to be. Hayes brought something to that character that no script could fully provide. His voice, rich and unhurried, capable of shifting from sincere advice to full gospel-inflected song without any seam between them, gave Chef a presence that animated characters do not automatically have. Chef felt real in a way that came entirely from the person performing him. For 9 seasons, that was the arrangement. Hayes performed, Chef appeared. The show used him when it needed needed warmth or music or an adult who would actually listen to what the boys were saying. Then, in early 2006, a public statement appeared under Isaac Hayes' name announcing that he was leaving South Park. The statement read, "There is a place in this world for satire, but there is a time when satire ends and intolerance and bigotry towards religious beliefs of others begins." The statement did not name Scientology directly. It did not name any specific episode, but the context was immediately clear to everyone who followed the show. Hayes was a committed member of the Church of Scientology. In November 2005, South Park had aired an episode called Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12, which spent its entire runtime mocking Scientology's belief system, presenting the actual documented beliefs of the church on screen, with a caption reading, "This is what Scientology actually believes," and then satirizing Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and R. Kelly, in a sequence that became one of the most talked about things the show had ever done. Trapped in the Closet won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. It was, by almost any critical measure, one of the most effective episodes the show had produced. Precise, fearless, and deeply funny in the specific way South Park is funny when Parker and Stone are fully committed to a target. Hayes had reportedly taken the episode in stride when it first aired. Multiple interviews at the time showed him accepting the mockery without visible distress. The show had always been an equal opportunity operation. No group, no religion, no public figure was exempt from being targeted, and Hayes had been part of that show for 9 years. He knew what the show was. Then, approximately 3 months after Trapped in the Closet aired, the resignation statement appeared, and 9 days after the statement appeared, South Park aired the Season 10 premiere. The episode is called The Return of Chef. What happens to Chef in that episode is not subtle. His voice, assembled from old recordings of Hayes performing dialogue from previous episodes, stitched together poorly and deliberately so that the seams are audible, returns to South Park as a man who has been brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club. The club, as the episode presents it, believes that having sexual contact with children grants immortality. Chef, under the club's influence, begins behaving in ways that are completely at odds with everything he was across 9 seasons of the show. He speaks in broken, mismatched sentences because the audio being used is not connected dialogue but isolated phrases pulled from different contexts and forced into new ones. The boys try to save him. They try to pull him back from what the club has done to him. They fail. Chef falls from a rope bridge. Lightning strikes him. He catches fire. He falls down a cliff. He lands on a branch that impales him. A mountain lion attacks him. A grizzly bear attacks him. The episode does not cut away from any of this. It shows all of it in sequence without mercy. And when it is over, Darth Chef appears, a mechanical version of the character put back together by the club in the shape of a villain, and Parker and Stone have made their position completely clear. Kyle's funeral speech for Chef delivered to the other boys is the moment where the show's anger becomes most legible. Kyle says that even though Chef said and did some horrible things, they should not think of him that way. They should remember the good time. The person who influenced the club, he says, is the one truly responsible, not Chef. The speech is written with enough ambiguity to function simultaneously as a genuine farewell to a character the boys love, and as a direct statement about Hayes, Scientology, and who Parker and Stone believe was actually behind the resignation. The episode closes with Darth Chef's voice, still assembled from old Hayes recordings, and a promise that Chef would return. He has not returned. Hayes died in August 2008, 2 years after the episode aired. The show dedicated its 2008 episode The China Problem to his memory. That is the version of events that was publicly understood for years. Hayes resigned over Trapped in the Closet. Parker and Stone responded with the return of Chef. Chef died. Hayes died. The chapter closed. Then Isaac Hayes III opened it back up. Isaac Hayes III is Hayes' son. In 2016, a detailed retrospective on South Park's history was published by The Hollywood Reporter. As part of that piece, Hayes III gave an interview in which he said something that reframed every assumption about why his father left the show. His statement: Isaac Hayes did not quit South Park. Someone quit South Park for him. What Hayes III described was a specific sequence of events that began not with Trapped in the Closet, but with something that happened 2 months after it aired. In January 2006, Hayes suffered a stroke. The stroke was serious. It affected his ability to communicate in the way he had before. He lost capacities that had been central to who he was. His ability to process and respond to situations in his normal manner was diminished by what the stroke had done to him. The resignation statement appeared in March 2006, approximately 2 months after the stroke. Hayes III's position is that the statement was not written by his father. His belief, stated directly in the interview, is that Scientology representative, people in his father's inner circle who were members of the church, submitted the resignation on Hayes' behalf while he was still in a weakened state following the stroke. They had access to him, they were managing his affairs, and they had a clear reason reason to want him removed from a show that had just spent an entire episode publicly humiliating their religion and detailing its belief system for a national audience. Matt Stone's account, given in the same Hollywood Reporter retrospective, adds a layer to this. Stone confirmed that before the Trapped in the Closet controversy became public, the show had made a deliberate decision not to re-air the episode. They held it back specifically to give Hayes what Stone described as plausible deniability with the church, a way for Hayes to tell Scientology leadership that the episode had been suppressed, that the show was not going to keep using it, that there was no ongoing problem. Parker and Stone were trying to protect their friend's relationship with his religion by keeping the episode out of rotation. When the resignation statement appeared, Stone said they were blindsided. They had not seen it coming. They had been operating under the belief that the situation with Hayes was manageable, that the relationship was intact, and then a public statement arrived that made it impossible to continue as if nothing had changed. Stone's account does not confirm or deny Hayes III's claim that the statement was submitted by Scientology representatives without Hayes' knowledge or consent. What it does confirm is that the show had been actively trying to protect Hayes from the fallout of Trapped in the Closet, and that the resignation landed as a surprise. Far Out magazine's reporting on Hayes' departure notes that Hayes had intimated in subsequent communications that there were additional factors beyond religious offense, including concerns about his compensation from the show and difficulties in the working relationship with Parker and Stone. Whether these were Hayes' own feelings or reflected the position of the people managing his affairs after the stroke is something the available evidence cannot definitively establish. The core of what makes this an unsolved mystery is that Isaac Hayes never publicly contradicted the resignation statement. From March 2006 until his death in August 2008, Hayes did not give an interview or make a public statement saying that the letter did not represent his wishes, that he had been misrepresented, or that he wanted to return to the show. Hayes III's account places this silence in the context of his father's diminished capacity following the stroke, a man who had lost certain communicative abilities and was surrounded by people who may not have been acting in his best interests, was not in a position to publicly correct a false statement submitted in his name. But the silence is the silence. It lasted 2 years, and in those 2 years, the version of events that the public had access to was the version in which Hayes resigned over religious objections, and the show responded by killing Chef on television. Crack's reporting on the situation, which draws on Hayes' 3 statements, and the Hollywood Reporter retrospective, notes something specific about the timeline that adds weight to the claim. Hayes suffered the stroke in January 2006. The resignation statement appeared in March 2006. The gap between the stroke and the statement is approximately 8 weeks, long enough for people managing Hayes' affairs to have assessed the situation, made a decision, and acted on it, but short enough that Hayes himself would still have been in the early stages of recovery from a serious neurological event. A stroke of the kind Hayes experienced does not leave a person immediately capable of monitoring every professional communication sent in their name, challenging decisions made by their representatives, or publicly correcting a record that had been altered without their consent. The timeline, as Hayes III presents it, is one in which a vulnerable man in a weakened had a consequential professional decision made for him by people with their own reasons for making it. Parker and Stone's response, The Return of Chef, was made in 9 days. That production speed is remarkable even by South Park standards, and it reflects how immediate and personal the situation felt to them. The episode was not developed over weeks, with careful consideration of what it meant. It was assembled rapidly from existing audio into something that expressed genuine anger and genuine hurt, and it aired before anyone involved had time to fully understand what had actually happened. The Scientology framing of the episode, Chef brainwashed by a cult into becoming someone unrecognizable, reads very differently depending on which version of events is true. If Hayes resigned of his own free will over genuine religious offense, the brainwashing metaphor is harsh but arguable. A creative team saying that the institution took their friend away from something he loved. If Hayes was removed from the show by Scientology representatives acting without his full informed consent, the brainwashing metaphor is closer to the literal truth than Parker and Stone may have even realized when they wrote it. The show dedicated the China Problem to Hayes' memory in 2008. That dedication was genuine. Whatever anger existed in the return of Chef, Parker, and Stone's affection for Hayes as a person, separate from the circumstances of his departure, was real enough to be expressed publicly when he died. The dedication does not resolve the question of what happened in March 2006. It simply confirms that the professional rupture and the personal regard existed simultaneously, which is one of the more quietly complicated things in the show's history. What Hayes III has established through his public statements and the timeline he provided is that the story of why Chef left South Park has at least two possible versions. One version is a man of faith drawing a line and walking away from a show that crossed it. The other version is a man in medical distress having a decision made for him by an institution with reasons of its own, and spending the last 2 years of his life unable or unwilling to publicly correct what had been done. Both versions end in the same place. Chef is gone. The character was killed in a way that expressed the show's anger clearly and without restraint. Hayes died 2 years later. The truth of what he wanted, whether he wanted to stay on the show, whether he found the episode offensive in the way the statement claimed, whether the statement even came from him, is something that died with him. Hayes 3 has been consistent and specific in his account. Stone has confirmed enough of the surrounding circumstances to make the timeline Hayes 3's describes plausible, but plausible is not proven. The statement exists. The resignation happened, the stroke happened, and the person at the center of all of it cannot speak to any of it anymore. The Chef mystery is the one case in this entire video where the answer is not hidden inside an episode, or buried in a production wiki, or sitting in a trivia note waiting to be found. The answer is genuinely gone. Whatever Isaac Hayes understood to have happened in March 2006, whatever he felt, whatever he knew, whatever was done in his name, left the world with him in August 2008 and has not come back. Most of South Park's continuity problems are the kind that can be tracked, documented, and laid out in sequence. The name changes and the contradictory backstories and the wrong flashbacks and the triple retcon on Cartman's father. All of those are puzzles with pieces, and the pieces exist somewhere in the archive of the show's 26 seasons. The Chef situation is different. The piece that would settle it is missing, and there is no archive to search for it in. What remains is the show, and the character, and the performance across 9 seasons of a man who by every available account genuinely loved being part of South Park, and an episode built from the fragments of that performance, stitched together into something barely recognizable, played out as a death on a cliff in the mountains of Colorado. South Park has carried contradictions in almost every corner of its world, in its characters' names, their origins, their histories, and the mechanics of its most fundamental running jokes. Most of those contradictions are the product of speed and creativity, and a show that builds its world faster than any single person can track. The Chef situation is the one place where the contradiction is not between 2 episodes or 2 seasons, but between 2 entirely different accounts of a real moment in the lives of real people, and where the show's response to that moment, whatever its original intention, may have been closer to the truth than anyone realized at the time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The character the show built in his absence, or rather, the absence of the character the show built, points towards something that runs deeper than any single timeline error. Because Randy Marsh, who started as a background geologist who had not yet been established as Stan's father, ended up becoming the most prominent adult presence in the show's later season. And the way that happened, gradually, accidentally, through the same process of building outward from whatever the current episode needed, left its own trail of small contradictions that the show has never fully smoothed over. Section 10. Randy Marsh. The background character who retroactively became Stan's father, Randy Marsh, appears in the 3rd episode of South Park. The episode is called Volcano. It is Season 1, Episode 2 by broadcast order, though its production code is 103, making it technically the 3rd episode produced. It aired on August 20th, 1997, less than 2 weeks after the show's premiere. In it, Stan and his friends go on a hunting trip with Stan's uncle Jimbo and Jimbo's war buddy Ned. A volcano threatens to erupt near South Park. Randy Marsh is present in the episode as a geologist, a scientist who studies the ground and measures seismic activity, working at the South Park Center for Seismic Activity, monitoring equipment, and assessing whether the ground is stable. He is not established as Stan's father in this episode. The South Park CC.com official wiki states this plainly in its entry for Randy Marsh. Randy was first seen in the 3rd episode, Volcano, although his relationship as Stan's father is never discussed in this episode. He is simply a geologist in that first appearance. He monitors a seismometer. He assesses the situation. He is an adult with a professional function in the episode's plot, connected to the main story through the volcano threat rather than through any relationship to the boys. Stan is present in the episode. Randy is present in this episode. The show does not connect them. That connection came later. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of revelation, but gradually, through subsequent episodes that began filling in the Marsh family structure and establishing Randy as Stan's father in the way that background details accumulate across a season of television. By the end of season 1, the relationship was understood, but it was not there in Volcano, and the character who would eventually become the most prominent parent in South Park's history entered the show as a functional adult with no family ties to anyone, the audience, audience already cared about. The movie web piece on Randy's character evolution captures this precisely, noting that while Volcano established him as a geologist, he was not yet established as Stan's dad, and that his presence was not really felt throughout the first season at all. He was one adult among several, present when the plot needed a scientist, absent otherwise, not yet the person who would eventually take over entire seasons of the show's storytelling. The Grokopedia entry for Randy Marsh provides additional detail about his early seasons, noting that during the remainder of season 1 and into seasons 2 through 5, Randy's roles remained minor and peripheral, typically limited to scenes establishing him as a conventional middle-class family man with a doctorate in geology, but prone to everyday anxiety. This is the Randy Marsh of the show's early years, a background presence, a functional adult, a man who existed to provide Stan with a father and the Marsh household with a head. What happened to that character across the show's middle and later seasons is one of the most significant character evolutions in South Park's history, and it happened without a plan. The South Park Fandom Wiki's entry for Randy describes the shift in terms that the show itself eventually addressed within the narrative. In early seasons, he was calmer and more level-headed, often providing advice to the boys. The wiki notes that his later characterization as, in Trey Parker's own words, the biggest dingbat in the entire show, was eventually explained within the story as being caused by his unhappiness in his marriage. The show retroactively applied an in-universe reason for why Randy became less competent and more chaotic as the seasons progressed, just as it had retroactively applied an origin story to Ike and retroactively corrected Tolkien's name and retroactively declared the hermaphrodite answer about Cartman's father to be a lie. The retroactive explanation is tidier than the reality of what happened, which is that Randy Marsh became funnier and more extreme as the writers discovered what he was capable of. Parker and Stone found that Randy as a character could carry plots in a way that the boys' parents had not previously been used for. He could be the episode's engine rather than its background. He could be wrong in specific and escalating ways that were funny precisely because he was supposed to be the responsible adult and consistently failed to be. His doctorate in geology, a fact established in Volcano when he was a competent professional monitoring equipment, became a running irony in later seasons when the same man made catastrophically bad decisions in almost every context the show placed him in. The occupation list that the show built around Randy across its run is its own kind of continuity record. He is a geologist from season 1 through season 22. He serves as the school chef in the season 14 episode Creme Fraiche, taking over the cafeteria after Chef's departure and developing an obsession with cooking that the episode treats as a crisis. He becomes the head coach of the Denver Broncos in the season 16 episode Sarcastaball, in which he invents a new sport based on a sarcastic suggestion he makes at a school meeting that everyone takes literally. He becomes a singer-songwriter in season 18, performing as a musician in a storyline connected to that season's serialized format. He founds Tegrity Farms in season 22, converting his family's land into a hemp farming operation that becomes one of the show's most sustained running storylines across multiple subsequent seasons. He returns to geology in South Park, The Streaming Wars Part 2. He sells Tegrity Farms in the episode Sycophancy. Each of these occupations exists within the logic of whichever season or episode introduced it. Some of them last for multiple seasons, some of them last for one episode. The show has never provided a clean accounting of how a man who spent 22 seasons as a professional geologist with a doctorate also managed to coach a professional football team, run a school cafeteria, pursue a music career, and operate a large agricultural business simultaneously or in sequence. The occupations accumulate around Randy the way contradictions accumulate around every major South Park character, added when needed, not always reconciled with what came before. The marriage continuity problem sits alongside the occupation list as a separate thread. In season 15, episode 7, the episode called You're Getting Old, Randy and Sharon Marsh separate. The episode is one of the most tonally unusual things South Park produced in its middle season. It ends with a genuine sense of sadness and change, the family splitting apart, Stan moving with Sharon while Randy stays, the familiar South Park world feeling genuinely disrupted for once rather than reset. The episode aired on June 8, 2011, and left the audience with the understanding that something had actually shifted. One episode later, season 15, episode 8, the episode called Asperger's, Randy and Sharon reconcile. They remarry. The family gets the house back. The separation is resolved in 22 minutes. The South Park Fandom Wiki documents this sequence factually, noting that in You're Getting Old, Randy divorced Sharon and moved away, and that in Asperger's he reconciled with her and remarried, getting their old house back. The wiki does not editorialize on the speed of this resolution. It simply states what happened. The divorce and the reconciliation are both canon. They both exist in the show's timeline, timeline, one episode apart, with no substantial examination of what changed between them or why the reconciliation happened as quickly as it did. This is the Randy continuity problem in miniature. The show built towards something significant, a gen break in the Marsh family that you're getting old, treated with more emotional weight than South Park usually applies to anything, and then resolved it at the pace that South Park resolves everything, which is to say immediately and without prolonged consequences. The weight of your getting old is real. The speed of Asperger's resolution is also real. Both of them are in the show. The tension between them never got addressed. Randy Marsh as a character is the clearest example of South Park's broader timeline problem because he was there from the beginning and he changed more than almost anyone else, and those changes were never organized around a plan. He started as a background geologist. He became Stan's father. He became the show's most reliable source of adult chaos. He became a farmer. He went back to geology. Each version of Randy is the version that the current episode needed, and each version is built on top of the previous ones without always checking whether the foundation holds. This is the condition of South Park's timeline as a whole. Across 10 cases, Cartman's father, Kenny's deaths, Tolkien's name, Kyle's origin, Butter's dad's name, Sheila's original name, Ike's Canadian identity, the wrong flashbacks in City on the Edge of Forever, the chef mystery, and Randy's retroactive establishment as Stan's father. The same pattern appears in different forms. The show builds its world at speed. The world that gets built is funny and specific and emotionally real in moments that no amount of continuity planning could have produced on a schedule. And the cost of that speed is a timeline that contradicts itself regularly, quietly, and sometimes loudly across 26 seasons of television. Some of those contradictions are small. A father whose name changed between seasons. A mother who shared a name with another mother in one early episode. A character whose surname evolved from Williams to Black to a completely different word across 3 decades. Some of them are structural. A boy's origin story that places his family's arrival in South Park at 2 different points in time, depending on which season is telling it. A baby whose Canadian identity was assigned retroactively because of the way his face was drawn. A clip show episode where every clip is intentionally wrong and the whole thing turns out to be a dream. Some of them are enormous. A 13-year mystery about a main character's father that was answered 3 times with 3 different answers, where the final answer made the most beloved dark episode in the show's early run retroactively into a tragedy the character caused without knowing it. A running joke about a child dying that the show tried to explain 3 separate times, each explanation partially covering what the previous one could not, none of them fully resolving the same episode resurrection problem that existed from the very beginning. A character whose name the show declared had always been spelled differently, in direct contradiction of visual evidence from the character's own belongings across multiple seasons, and one of them is not funny at all. A real person whose departure from the show may or may not have represented his own wishes, whose son has stated up publicly that the decision was made for him during a period of medical vulnerability, and whose death in 2008 meant that the truth of what he wanted, whether he chose to leave or was removed, went with him. The South Park timeline, examined across all 10 of these cases together, tells a specific story about how the show was made and what it prioritized. It was not made to be consistent. It was made to be funny, to be fast, to respond to the world as it was happening, rather than to a plan that had been developed in advance. The consistency problems that resulted from this approach are not failures of craft. They are the evidence of craft being applied at a speed and volume that made perfect internal continuity structurally impossible. Parker and Stone have produced over 300 episodes of South Park. They have done this with a production pipeline that is genuinely extraordinary. Episodes written, animated, recorded, and broadcast in days rather than months, sometimes in direct response to news events that happened that same week. The Cartoon Wars episode, responding to the Muhammad cartoon controversy. The episode about the 2010 BP oil spill that aired while the spill was still ongoing. The COVID specials. The election episode. The episodes about events that had not finished happening when the show started making them. At that pace, maintaining a detailed internal record of every name assigned to every character in every episode across 26 seasons is not a realistic expectation. The wonder is not that the Carol situation happened, or that Butter's dad had 2 names, or that Randy's first episode did not establish him as Stan's father. The wonder is that across 300 episodes made at extraordinary speed, the show produced characters who feel as complete and specific and genuinely inhabited as the ones that populate South Park. Characters who have become reference points in popular culture, whose relationships and dynamics and specific ways of being wrong about things have been internalized by an entire generation of viewers. The contradictions exist inside something that works. They are the texture of a show that was always more interested in what it was doing right now than in what it had done before. South Park's relationship to its own timeline is the relationship of a show that moves forward constantly and looks back only when the looking back is itself something to make comedy out of, as in City on the Edge of Forever, where the flashbacks are wrong on purpose and the show uses a dream to dissolve the impossibilities it created. The 10 cases in this video represent the places where that forward movement left visible tracks, where the speed of production created gaps between what was established and what came next, where creative decisions made in different seasons for different reasons landed on top of each other and produced contradictions that the show either addressed through retcon, dissolved through comedy, quietly ignored, or, in one case, genuinely could not resolve because the person at the center of it is no longer alive to speak to it. What all 10 cases share underneath the specific details of each one is a show that treats its own world as raw material rather than sacred text. The timeline is not a document that South Park protects. It is a resource the show draws from when it is useful and revises when revision serves a better joke or a better story or a better season. The hermaphrodite answer to the question of Cartman's father sat on the record for 12 years before the show decided a better answer existed and replaced it. Tolkien's name sat as token for 25 years before the show decided the joke had run its course and retired it. Ike's origin did not exist until his face reminded the writers that it needed to. Each of these revisions produced something the original version could not have produced. The Cartman's father retcon made Scott Tenorman Must Die into something darker and more permanent than it was when it first aired. The Tolkien retcon gave a character who had been defined entirely by his function a name that defined him by his parents' love of literature instead. Ike's Canadian identity gave the show the adoption storyline, the Christmas in Canada episode, the Mysterian arc's explanation for Kenny's immortality running through his parents' cult involvement, a chain of creative consequences that began with a drawing choice that was made before any of it was planned. South Park's timeline is wrong in places. It is also, in those same places, evidence of a show that was always willing to be wrong in the service of being better, to go back over what it had established and find new angles in old material, new meanings in old jokes, new stories inside characters who had been present from the beginning but not yet fully understood. Randy Marsh was in Volcano before he was Stan's father. Ike Broflovsky was Kyle's brother before he was Canadian. Token Black was on the show for 25 years before his name was Tolkien. Chef was in South Park for 9 seasons before the circumstances of his leaving created a mystery that has not been resolved in the 15 years since. The show kept going through all of it. 300 episodes and counting, each one made at speed, each one adding new material to a world that was already full of contradictions, each one somehow producing something that the people who watch it remember, not because the timeline is clean, but because the show inside that timeline has always been alive in a way that clean timelines rarely produce. The mistakes are real, the show is also real. Both of those things are true, and the space between them is where South Park has always lived. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.